I think one of the big misconceptions is we still have a lot of business executives that think hackers are kids in hoodies in their mom's basement. They don't understand these are massively well-funded groups. And even North Korea, which like some people kind of forget about stuff, but this year in a single attack, North Korea stole $1.5 billion from just one event.
Trey Blalock,
Hey, how's it going?
fantastic to have you with me today. Tell us about what you do.
Yeah, so I deal with large scale security and defending large organizations from attackers of all sorts and emerging threats. I specialize in doing a lot of stuff around research on the weaponization of AI and how attackers are using AI to attack different organizations. But I've got a really long background in security from doing large scale forensics, defending the United States in high profile court cases. I own a company that does penetration testing and red teaming, and I've been chief information security officer of some very large organizations. The one most people have heard of is Coinstar, which everyone thinks of as where you drop change in machines, but it's actually connected to all these fintech organizations and stuff. So I do a lot of different things.
Yeah, very cool. I mean, when I saw your background and all the different certifications you have, I'm like, wow, this is a guy that has not only spent a career learning about all these different aspects of cybersecurity, but, is on, we'll call it the cutting edge of, what's happening right now. So fantastic to have you here. I want to talk about AI. Who doesn't these days in cybersecurity? I guess I'll just throw it to you to start with. Like, what are some things that you're seeing from just defending against some of these novel techniques that attackers may be using AI?
I think one of the things with AI that's tricky is it's hard to do attribution on which of the attacks were leveraging AI. And one of the things that I kind of like to remind people is that their programming teams are benefiting from the ability to do AI, and they don't have to have perfect code to launch attacks. And so
Right.
in the way that we have to have perfect code around our defenses, they can use the vibe coding, so to speak, for attacks and stuff, and use that to weaponize things to get in a lot easier. The other thing is it requires a lot less code, so they end up having a kind of an asymmetric time advantage in that it's easier. If you think of like SQL injections, it's literally like one line of code to go through 10,000 lines or 100,000 lines of defenses. So they have a very big advantage and a first player advantage. The other thing, though, we're seeing is that they're leveraging AI to do things in ways that we probably weren't thinking that was going to be an issue. So they're doing things for disassembly, so they can disassemble binaries and start looking at code, which makes it easier to find 0 days and compiled code. And likewise, they can use LLMs for fuzzing. So that became a really big thing. So that's another way that they can find new 0 days. So one of the things that we're very concerned about is there might be potentially a tenfold or more increase in the number of 0 days, which means the number of attacks that we're going to have to defend for could start going up rapidly. So there's a lot of dynamics that when you start accelerating some of this stuff, it can accelerate things in a very harmful way from the standpoint of attackers. Meanwhile, at the same standpoint, we've got all these people that are vibe coding and moving faster in their business, and they're launching code that effectively hasn't been tested. We are radically increasing our attack surface as fast as we can, and businesses are literally adding as much as they can to jam these AI features into stuff, and we are just accelerating attack surface like you wouldn't believe. So
Yeah, it feels like the early days of the internet, right? Of a certain age
Yeah.
to have been around during that time. But yeah, I mean, it was just, move fast and break things, right? Sort of mentality. So yeah, so going back to what you said earlier about attribution. So when I originally think about attribution, I'm thinking about, okay, who did it? Was it the Chinese? Was it the Russians? Was it the North Koreans? And of course, you can look at different tactics and techniques that they use, TTPs and stuff. And I know that is an art in and of itself to try to figure out attribution, but I hadn't thought about what you mentioned, which is attribution to say, okay, did they use AI or not for this?
yes, yeah. AI is being used to make some of those attacks more deceptive. And the other thing is that we've realized is a lot of the threat actors realized how we were using things like MITRE to basically do attribution and kind of figure out which attackers are doing things. And they have turned around and countered and realized that they can even make things so that their code includes things like Russian language. So it looks like the Russians instead of the Chinese or something like that. The other thing that they're doing that I find very interesting is the Chinese have started using these things called orb networks. And you can almost think of it as a private version of Tor, but it also allows them to have selective IPs. And so they can do things like have traffic pop out within 5 miles of a target. And it can maybe traffic would pop out on, a home user that looks like a potential employee. It could be like a local ISP or something like that. And so some of the things that we used to do for attribution, like especially with using like GeoIP, they have completely broken that model. And so GeoIP security tools are no longer effective against that particular threat actor and stuff. So it's accelerating the game and making a lot of the tools we used to do for investigative purposes and OSINT and attribution much, much harder. And at a very mind-bending pace. Like suddenly lots of security tools we had are just going out the door.
Right. So what's an example of a security tool going out the door? I mean, you mentioned GeoIP. I think that has been kind of dead for a while, since the cloud at least. And you mentioned orb networks. So
it's still used in certain places. It's not as common, but we're also seeing a lot of other traditional tools get bypassed. So like if you look at all the two-factor auth, everybody was like two-factor auth is going to save the world and stuff like that. But if you go out and start looking for MFA bypass, you can find like tons of different ways to get around these things. And so there's a lot of different problems. And then we also have issues with people stealing cookies out of browsers and stuff like that. And they're getting pre-authenticated sessions. The attackers are leveraging that information. And there's dark websites where you can say, like, I want to buy the last 5 minutes of a cookies for the entire US for all the browsers we've got. And then suddenly it's giving them access to hundreds of thousands of machines. And it's authenticated access in a sense that, like, I like to explain it like when people go to Amazon and you're shopping, you can pop open another browser and you don't have to log in. It's effectively giving them that kind of access. And the key phrase, if the web server is not blocking again based on like IP address and stuff like that, if it's not double checking and it's just assuming that like I've got this token or I've got this cookie, that's the same person, it logs the attacker in as you, and then bam, it's just bypassed all of that. So, depending on the controls in place, which are rare, I might add, these are very, very effective tools for attackers to get around a lot of the security controls we have.
we had just come across a product recently that we introduced into our company and felt that it was a good solution to that. It's a browser plugin called Push Security, and helps guard against that very thing, both what you just described, which is the session takeover type stuff, as well as just other browser-based attacks or, phishing as well. It'll make sure it's like, okay, is this really your 365 login? It may look like your 365 login, but is it really? And then it won't let you put in, your actual creds into the quote unquote bad site, the phishing
That's
site.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The tricky thing with some of those is it depends on the way the theft of the data occurs too, though. Yeah. And there's, some of it happens through people installing bad browser plugins. Some of it happens when browsers get hooked. There's potential for man-in-the-middle stuff. Some of it's JavaScript libraries on a legitimate site and stuff. So there's a lot of different ways that the attackers are figuring out how to get that information and then leverage it against us.
They can maybe buy it at scale, but to sort of like attack an organization. So I'm going to go after, said company.
There's an entire set of markets of access brokers that say, like, I want to target this one company, and you can go log on there and say, like, does anybody have access to this? Like, and if they do, it's like, yeah, here's, 500 accounts. There are accounts at this level, or maybe these are call center accounts, but occasionally you might get an admin account. So, and the admin accounts sell for more. So, it's definitely an issue. So.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the AI though, and you're talking about attribution and the Chinese government, it seems that the Chinese government in particular would have the resources to really leverage AI and be able to ramp up their activities, whatever those might be, because they are a nation state, because they will just have access to the resources to do all these kinds of things versus just, sort of other random groups.
Yeah. I think one of the big misconceptions is we still have a lot of like business executives that think hackers are, kids in hoodies in their mom's basement kind of thing. And they haven't seen that, like, China has hundreds of thousands of people. It's literally their military organization. And the US has we have actually over 100 military groups that are just in cyber. And so they don't understand these are massively well-funded groups. And even North Korea, which like some people like kind of forget about stuff, but like this year in a single attack, North Korea stole 1.5 billion with a B dollars from just one event.
Yeah, I heard about that. That was like crazy. And then the North Koreans are just like so good at all of that cryptocurrency theft in particular.
And that same group had previously tried to steal $1 billion from the Federal Reserve, but it got blocked. And so if you look at the size, just sheerly the amount of money, if they wanted to do nothing else, that gives them, 1,500 attempts or whatever to bribe people with $1 million to get like a USB installed in some other organization. Like, I mean, the amount of money that they could use for building machine learning clusters for hacking stuff and creating 0 days. Like, and the same thing with the ransomware groups. If you look at some of the Russian ransomware groups, we can see how much money they get in the wallets, but even in the news, like you see these ransomware for 40 million, 10 million, 20 million. You see these again and again and again. It doesn't take a lot for these groups to suddenly have enough funding to do a lot more damage than, people are thinking about.
It feels like it's accelerating the cybercrime and the amount of money that these guys are generating, just in terms of economy.
They're actually really good at scaling their businesses so that they view it as a business. And so one of the things we've seen that's been growing is the ransomware as a service, distributed denial of service as a service, those kind of things. And those features are allowing those businesses to scale and attack more companies and have more tools to attack people. And it's dropping the entry level knowledge needed for attackers to get into things. And so what we're seeing is what would be like traditional drug groups and stuff, other types of organized crime. And they're getting into cyber because they realize, hey, this is profitable. Why don't we get into that? And it's unfortunately it's scaling it up and it's causing a whole lot more damage against companies. And the US is, in some sense, US companies and US individuals that have money are the primary targets for a lot of these. So we're going to see a lot of first person pain coming up on this. So
where are these criminals located? So you mentioned North Korea, you mentioned Russia. Do we have a good sense of like 80-20?
Yeah, we do. So it depends on, there are different types of criminals doing different types of things. If you look at things like the nation state stuff, it tends to be kind of like the bigger ones. Like every country in the world's kind of gotten into cyber. So, I mean, it's not pinpointing, it's really more pinpointing who is targeting the US versus not targeting the US. So that typically tends to be the big Russia, China. We've got Iran. There's a lot of different countries that are upset with the US and targeting the US. But when you switch to ransomware, a very large portion of that immediately becomes like Russian organized crime groups. You get a lot of smaller entities. There's like over 300 ransomware groups now. So the number of ransomware groups went up from 200 to 300 or so, over 300 in the last year. And then for other types of crimes, like another crime that people really should be more aware of but aren't, is the sextortion stuff. And a lot of the sextortion comes from specific countries in Africa. And just because it happened to get popular, it's cheap to do and stuff like that. They had the skills for social engineering and stuff like that. But that has become a thing where it's affecting in the United States. And again, they target the US primarily. It's like 1 in 7 boys, I think, from like 11 to 17 become a victim. It's a huge percentage of people that become a victim. And they, basically end up thinking they're meeting a girl online and they're exchanging photos. And the second these guys get one photo, the whole situation changes and the kid's in trouble and stuff. And it causes a lot of suicides, So we have like knowledge that these attackers from these addresses should not be on certain sites where, they're impacting kids. But a lot of that stuff's coming in through like Instagram and stuff like that. And Snapchat's obviously a big one for photo sharing and stuff. But anything where kids are sharing photos is a potential situation for these attackers to come in. I like the idea of blocking that, but I understand these are global companies and they want to be able to have Instagram in every country in the world. But, anyway, long story short, different attacks we're definitely seeing come from different areas and different groups. So,
Right. Wow. That's so much to just wrap your brain around. So is this something to just thinking now from a defender standpoint, or even if I'm a parent and I have kids that I want to protect against this, my kids, my community, is this something we can educate our way out of it, or things just moving too quickly that it feels like you put your finger in the dike and then more holes open up?
yeah, so that is definitely true. The attackers are basically molding their businesses around our responses and reactions. So that every time we change something, they're going to change something on their side. That said, I think the education that needs to be given to kids, frankly, probably should even be happening in schools. Like we need to make sure we've got coverage so kids don't fall victims to these things. Likewise, we need to make them psychologically prepared so that if something like this happens to them, it is not the end of the world. So that's another thing. So, but more to your point, for all of these different types of attacks, we're running into again and again and again where businesses and organizations or individuals are not prepared because they just don't think it's going to happen to them. And I've seen some hilarious excuses from businesses where they just they simply don't understand how attacks work. And one thing that I like to show people, like when I'm doing large public talks, is there are tools like ZMAP and MassScan that can connect to every IP4 address in less than 5 minutes, and they get a response from every IP4 address. And a lot of business owners don't understand that exists. And they think, like, I've heard some hilarious stories. Like I used to do a lot of forensics for banks and stuff, and I had one that was in the Midwest, and they said they only thought the banks on the East Coast and the West Coast got attacked by hackers. And I'm like, how on earth did you come up with that? But like, I see this again and again, still in 2025, where businesses like the executives are big risk takers, and they're making money on gambles. So like, if you're doing a startup, you're gambling, and they're so used to it, but they just rule out because they don't have any experience of incidents that they think this will never happen to them. And you just see it again and again and again and again. But yeah, the same thing for families, the same thing for children.
Yeah, it would seem with those banks, it'd be like, let's see if you're in Shodan. You are.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I do a demo where I use, there's another one called Census, CENSYS.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
And I do one where I say, like, let's find credit unions or banks that have RDP open to the world in the United States. And it's like, whoop, here's your list. And here's the, geo map of where they're at and everything. And shows you what other ports are open. And I mean, it's just mind boggling what is left open on systems these days.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is just maybe, I guess, the low-hanging fruit. It just seems like we have so many tools, we have so many resources, and yeah, some of them maybe aren't as great as they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but it seems like these guys are getting in on the most basic things. You mentioned RDP. It's a lot of times you'll find it's just like, it's dumb stuff, right?
A little bit of it depends on the attacker.
Depends on the attacker. Okay.
Yeah. So the nation state actors that are trying to get into like all of our critical infrastructure and trying to get into our businesses so they could potentially shut it down, some of them are using advanced attacks. Ransomware, almost always using low tech stuff. It very much depends on who the attacker is. But we're seeing so many companies do things they shouldn't be doing. Like I did a search recently for all the MCP servers exposed on the internet, and it was thousands. And like I was looking at this, and I was like, these things are totally not secure. This is like, and you see that kind of stuff. Same thing. You can do the same searches for like critical infrastructure components and stuff.
Yeah.
Just sites that I don't think the businesses understand. Like there's a very visible pattern, and this is very noticeable on the internet, and they don't think it's a problem, but it's like to an attacker, it's like, oh man, that's just lit up like crazy. Yeah, like, yeah, you're on my list now. Here we go.
I'm sure, not that they're not capable of super sophisticated attacks, but I wonder, just like with Salt Typhoon, right, where the Chinese government got into telecommunications companies, got into the telecommunications networks. I won't say all of them, but almost all of them, all the major ones certainly. And I don't know that they've disclosed how they got in. I think they're kind of keeping that under wraps. Maybe you have more insight on that, but I think some of it was, Cisco CVE from 2023 that didn't get patched, that was really, really bad. And there was just a lot of it out there, and people didn't get around to patching it, and it was open in places it shouldn't have been. So yeah, I think, and then once they get in, then they can sort of find ways to be persistent, and maybe that's more the advanced stuff that you're talking about. But just about Salt Typhoon, like, do you have any insight onto how they got in and
I have a lot just because I've worked for large telecoms.
Yeah, like how did it get to? How are all of these guys? Are they all running the same stuff? Like what happened?
So one thing I have to mention is that the telecoms have a massive amount of exposed attack surface. Like, I mean, it's just tens and if not hundreds of thousands of machines. If you include the antennas, it is way beyond hundreds of thousands of machines. And but just because they do so much business with so many different vendors, that they have tons of systems that have been running for years in various states of security. And even though some of those companies have hundreds of security employees, like very, very large security teams where you're getting like, a chunk of 1,000 people just focused on security. The business objectives are all over the place, and a lot of the problems are owned by the supply chain, not necessarily owned by the telecom. So you get into like, do you even have the, authority to go get things fixed in certain cases? So there's a lot of mistakes, and also the business culture between like the way that the telecoms were fighting between each other, and where we were seeing like AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile all fight. There was specifically US, but this happens in other countries as well. There was a really big push to go fast. And so they were spending everything to like, we've got to go fast. We've got to go fast. And so a lot of stuff gets launched without the proper security controls. And if that back end is hooked into large common things, I mean, it's a massive thing for attackers to get in there.
Yeah, but I don't know. It feels like, if it was one of them or even two of them that got hacked by the Chinese, but all of them, I mean, it's literally everyone. And I don't know if you have any specific insight on if there was the same vector that they used to get in, or they're using the same.
There are single tools like Cobalt Strike that could be used across all three and it would work. And so like, yeah, I'm sure like there's probably specific Chinese, C2 tooling that is more specific, but like it's not even a hard thing to get into some of these large companies. So, which is unfortunate. But yeah, but there are things where we get into our ability to be able to detect things. And one of the things that I worry about is like, we're not detecting these fast enough, and some of it is, part of it's a hard problem, but sometimes when we do find these, it's like, well, that shouldn't have been a hard problem. Like this machine shouldn't have been talking out to the inner, much less to another country or whatever. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but the organizations are very ill-equipped because they're not defending from the threats they think they're defending from. I mean, a lot of these organizations still have, vice presidents or whatever of, a product development team or something that literally thinks the only hackers in the world are kids in someone's basement. and they're not at all worried. Or they'll do something where they'll externalize it and say, well, it's not our problem. Amazon's the one hosting this or whatever it is and stuff. And so a lot of them will, just assume that a third party's picking up the slack, or they make assumptions that, these are hard to attack. And they don't understand how attacks actually work. And I find that, it's like once you start understanding how attacks actually work, you realize this takes way less technical, information to do than you think, and it's way faster than you think in a lot of cases. And attacks are kind of fun to like analyze because you realize, it's like there's some that are like mind-blowingly advanced and you're just like, wow, that was crazy. But then some are just dead easy. You're just like there's I'm going to try not to name names, but there is a firewall vendor in the United States that has had a lot of bugs. You will find these URLs and it's like one long URL. And what ends up happening is they keep having the same type bug again and again and again. And it's just a change in the pattern of the URL, but it drops the administrative passwords and the administrator accounts in the clear. And so a kid with a browser, literally a web browser that understands the URL structure, can go on Shodan, find a bunch of Fortinet products, and literally just keep changing the IP address until it hits. And then boom, here's a list of passwords. And then the way our businesses work, half the time, if not 90% of the time, that admin password on the firewall is the domain admin for the company. So like, you want to talk about easy way to put ransomware on a company? I mean, it's horrific. So yeah. So again, like, if you realize how easy some of these were, you would be wildly concerned about security, and our businesses are absolutely, in some cases, not,
Yeah, I think a lot of it is fighting the last war. And so going back to AI now, I wonder from a defender standpoint if there are things we can use with AI. And there's a new product that I heard about recently that sounded really cool and could maybe help, in these particular cases. I don't know about Fortinet, but could help with organizations that are, say, running a lot of critical infrastructure, which typically involves Linux. And so this product is called Sandfly, which it's an agentless monitoring. So it'll go in, look at logs, look at what other magic things that they have coded in to look at, but basically get good telemetry, kind of get a baseline on a system, and then be able to detect anomalies to say, oh, here's some anomalous behavior that's happening. Again, it doesn't, because it's agentless, it's just basically going into SSH, grabbing some information. It seems to me something like this that is collecting information. If we can do that at scale and pump it into some kind of machine learning based monitoring systems, that we can get a better handle on being able to see some of this anomalous activity before it goes ham.
Yeah. One of the problems is a really sophisticated attacker is very knowledgeable about how the defenses work on that. And so they'll do this thing where it's called living off the land, where they're going to use tools that are on the system so that there's no unique binaries in memory. There's nothing unique running on the system at all. Right. But the even more sophisticated ones will do things like a PS-EF. They'll see what processes are running. They'll look at like LSOF-I or something like that. I mean, being Linux specific, but like those similar tools run on Windows and stuff. But they'll see like what are the active connections this machine happens to have, and then what they'll do is they'll tiptoe so that things like NetFlow tools won't recognize this as a unique thing, because you basically trained it to ignore this particular database protocol from two systems. So you're watching like, this is a backup protocol. This is normal for this system. And what they'll use is they won't use any unique protocols because they don't want to trigger anything, and they won't use any unique commands that they don't see already running on the system. And then the other thing that they can do is they can look for scripts, and they can say like, well, there's a Python script. Can we just insert our code into the one that's already running? And if we do it that way, then the behavior anomalous thing will say, oh, that's just the Python script running again. The advanced attackers know how to get around some of this stuff. Their toolkits are very sophisticated, but the average like ransomware attacker and stuff like that, it should be catching them. So there's a lot of good those tools work, but like Any security tool, sadly, is never going to be a silver bullet. And part of it comes down to the holes are always going to come out before the fixes. And we don't really have, kind of control over that situation. And then there's always just this whack-a-mole of like, the second we get a better defense, the attackers will make a better attack. And it's just a back and forth inherent problem with this stuff. The other thing that we end up running into that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of is there are types of attacks that are kernel level attacks that don't necessarily show up in any of the logs. There's no user activity associated with it. Similarly, some attacks, and these are not common, there are some attacks that can take control of a daemon in such a way that it also is not logging, but it can actually get an attacker data. And then we also have companies just misconfigure stuff all the time. So somebody can do a smash and grab, and by the time that shows up in a SIM or something 5 minutes later, it's already gone. So, and the timing is something I pay attention to. Like specifically, if you were looking at like some of these firewall attacks that I mentioned, the attack dropping the credentials, the whole thing goes down in less than 300 milliseconds. And we don't have a lot of defenses that act that fast. And so there's a speed advantage that the attackers have. It's just something that a lot of defenders aren't thinking about when they build these tools.
With AI, is there anything that you are hopeful for, at least, that to say AI can help from the defender standpoint? Because a lot of these ways that we've been doing things maybe can't scale, aren't good at these novel kind of attacks, sort of the barrier to entry gets lower. Of course, the attackers are using AI, but is there hope for the defenders to be able to use AI to?
So AI has a processing speed problem to an extent where those low millisecond attacks, it's not really necessarily going to be helpful for us. For fraud, it is incredibly useful. You are crazy. If you have a fraud situation, you're crazy not to be using an AI tool to speed you up. There are areas where it is incredibly helpful. My concern a little bit is that I almost would like to see a mixture of harder traditional controls and AI at each different level that we're doing these types of controls, because some of the AI controls have unique failure points. And one of the problems we have is a lot of the defenders don't understand the edges of those tools. It's really important to understand where does your tool work and where does your tool stop working. And with traditional tools, that was fairly easy to figure out. Like, it's like, oh, it stops this type of attack 99% of the time, but it does not see it all this other thing. So we have to put a different control in. With AI, and specifically the way we market it now and the lack of descriptions on some of these products, we are unfortunately kind of handicapping ourselves because we see this tool, it's got incredible speed. And we're like, oh, that's great. It's handling all those logs. And then the defenders stop looking at the differences, or the defenders don't understand, like, hey, that takes care of this, but we still need to look at this other thing. And they're almost blinding themselves because of the massive benefit they're getting from speed of processing logs. But again, speed of processing logs is not necessarily good in some sense if you want to prevent the attack from beginning up front. And so if you're trying to prevent it up front, you've got to have something in front that knows to block this stuff quickly. And that tends to be a
Two
slightly
Fortinets.
harder. Huh?
Two Fortinets.
Yeah.
You got the one in case that gets hacked, and you got
Right.
another one right behind it. So that
Yes.
should be good. You're good then if you do that.
And one thing that I do recommend a lot of companies look at is their architecture. There are a lot of architectural solutions for some of these problems that we've known about for 30 plus years. Some of it's the design of, separating. A good example is like the way we deal with PCI data. Like if we deal with PCI data, like if nothing else, you've got to send this card data over to another system. That's got like a whole different set of security things. We don't put that in the primary data pool, so to speak. But if you go into almost any other realm of business, they don't do it that way. And they put all of the critical customer data and all the social security numbers and all the passport information goes in the same big database that has the same vulnerabilities on the front end. So we aren't doing data governance very well in a lot of organizations. And part of that's just the way we traditionally built things. And similarly, there's a lot of security tools. If you dig into learning about security tools and security architecture, we know hundreds and hundreds of different solutions for a lot of these things. But the business culture is like, we're moving too fast. We've just got to get something stood up. And it's not uncommon to see cloud services with literally nothing in front of them. There's nothing blocking bad IPs. There's nothing doing anything. It's literally like the most basic firewall just turning on a port.
Oh, yeah. I saw that in working with some organizations specifically around doing PCI compliance, other kinds of compliance as well. But yeah, it was literally the case. It's like, okay, here's the cardholder environment. All right, all eyes are on this. You have to go through the whole PCI checklist. Does it do this? Does it do that? Does it do the other? Okay, now you have this other piece that's in the cloud. It's like, oh, it's out of scope. What do you mean it's out of scope? It's you still need to nope, that's on. It's out of our department. Someone else. It's kind of this shadow IT sort of. I don't know. Yeah, it's less that way now, I think, because the cloud is more prevalent. But yeah,
I do find that Europe and Japan tend to be a little bit better, well, parts of Europe, about security across everything. Whereas in the United States, the PCI thing is a really good example. They'll spend a lot of money to get PCI compliance. They're really just getting compliance. PCI just happens to be a well-written standard that happens to have a lot of security. But then they'll get other kinds of compliance like SOC 2, and it'll just be horrible. And they're really not even trying to get security. They're just checking a box. And those are the companies that they're not putting a lot of security in up front. And it's like, you see them on the incident response side. It's like, hey, we've got ransomware. Can you help us now? And it's like, I could have helped you before, a lot cheaper, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, the thing that I really like about PCI is that it's not only a framework, but it's also very prescriptive. Do this, do that, and do the other. And you just need to do it. And here's the 384 things that you need to do, and you need to do them all. If you miss one, you're not compliant. So be sure you do them all. And I think, and of course it applies to cardholder data. But if you could imagine to say, okay, let's treat this other data as if it were cardholder data. I think just having that shift of mentality, hey, Mr. Telecom Giant, pretend that these systems you had here were cardholder data. What would you do differently? Just to go through that exercise, I think, if nothing else, just do the risk assessment part, which isn't necessarily prescriptive of that. But yeah, I don't know. It feels like the tools are there, but like you said, somehow it's just like we just keep... For cultural reasons, I don't know what it is. Yeah.
Something I like to point out to people is that a lot of the standards we use, especially like if you look at SOC 2 and HIPAA type things, they have no defenses. The word ransomware is not mentioned in those.
Yeah, because we're fighting the last battle, right? So these are things that were written.
Yeah, it's, again, we have an interesting problem with our business culture, in a mix of just moving fast and just being massively out of date. So, it's a free for all for the ransomware groups. I mean, it's literally, they are stealing billions of dollars from us. And it's just, it's easy pickings. They probably have so many targets they can hit. They just don't have enough time. I think that's actually part of why they did ransomware as a service, was so they can employ more people to ransom more companies faster.
Right. Yeah, because it's time and materials otherwise, basically. Going back to sort of the scam compounds and stuff, you can always find that, big pig to butcher, if you will. So, but yeah, if you're only one person or one gang, you can only hit so many companies at a time, and you may get lucky and get ones that can net you so much more, but yeah, if you could do it at scale, now you're talking tens, hundreds of millions of dollars.
So this is where AI also kind of comes into play, is these attackers know they want to start scaling up, and whether they're using AI to build better automation systems or whether they want to build agents to install ransomware, we are probably going to see at some point some type of ransomware that goes around to every IP address in the US blocks and tries to ransom every single company. It's not that far-fetched. We've already had other attacks do things like, let's go delete 30,000 MongoDB databases just arbitrarily and stuff. I expect us to see somebody go hit all the MCP servers at any minute. There are thousands of them that are exposed right now. We've seen this for other database protocols and stuff like that. If you wanted to monetize that system, why not build an agent for ransomware payment, ransomware negotiation, and have one that's going and attacking using a pre-built toolkit? You can go use Cobalt Strike and say, we're going to launch this set of attacks against just relentlessly against every company in the United States for the next year, and try to ransomware 100,000 companies. It's not that far-fetched. It's just automation of things we already have. So those are the kind of things that I'm more worried about AI accelerating the scalability of attackers. I think that that's something I'm more concerned about. Also the ability to, if let's say, and they won't install the agent, like there's this like concept of these like rogue AI agents traveling the internet with all their code. I don't think that's what's going to happen at all. I mean, generally speaking, if you look at APTs, they're very concerned with, we do not want to lose our 0 days. And so they'll send something in, grab a foothold, look around to see if anything's capturing data or if there's any kind of security tools that would give away their stuff. And we don't want those types of, or the APTs don't want those types of defenses catching that stuff. But what I wouldn't be surprised is using AI to analyze, I'm in on a network, this is a quick Nmap scan of all the devices. These are all the databases. These are all the things. Tell me where the most valuable data is, or tell me where the most damaging systems I can disrupt if I want to shut down a power grid or something like that. Like for attack analysis, for OSINT, there's all these different things where AI, like I use AI for threat intelligence stuff, just goofing around. Like I don't trust it 100%, but it's like, it occasionally shows me things I've never seen. And I'm like, well, that's kind of useful. But if you were looking at it from the value add to an attacker, it's incredible and it speeds up their stuff amazingly. Another example of this is a lot. If you look at like Lockabit, some of the ransomware attackers, one of the things they were doing was business email compromise. Business email compromise is huge. And so they get into an Exchange server or something, and or an O365 account. They take a copy of all the email, like literally, let's get all the email. But then they need automation to go say, I'm going to go look for your cyber insurance policy. I'm going to go look for lawsuit information. I'm going to go look for, if an executive is cheating on somebody, anything that could create a scandal, HR events, those types of things. AI can analyze those things a million times faster than what they've been doing. And they've been doing a good job and been doing it very fast. So like when someone gets ransomware from Lockabit and you go to the Lockabit webpage on the dark web, it's got like, we know all of this about you. But AI can make the business decision of what is the maximum amount we could ransomware this company based on these 300 million emails.
Yeah, exactly. Because we have your cyber insurance policy, so we know you have a policy for $5 million or whatever. So guess what? We're going to ask for 4,995,000. Yeah.
I think AI is going to have, it's giving attackers a lot of capabilities and speed that we as organizations, defenders, and companies don't understand that they've got this capability now. I mean, you can just download DeepSeek and do this on your own, like fully, separated from the internet. So it's, it is definitely speeding up and it's accelerating the environment. It's lowering the bar for entry. It is putting us in a much more dangerous situation. And again, at the same time, where we're adding as much attack surface to our environments as we possibly can. So it's just a perfect storm for disaster in a lot of ways, coming. So not to scare everybody off. I do think that there's a lot of positives from, AI. But again, keep in mind, like when your defense tooling also has attack surface and can be attacked, it creates some dangerous problems that, you need to be aware of. And I think that's the part I feel like, we need to be, the environment needs to understand the defensive tools they're applying at a much more granular detail than they do. And that comes back to like, what are the simple things you can do to prevent some of these problems? And again, things like PCI, if you look at PCI, it's really just like an architecture. It's like, let's do this and put our high security data somewhere else. It's just simple things that we've known for technically thousands of years if you want to get into like physical security, but we're definitely known for 50 years on digital security. Don't allow low security things access into high security areas. You want high security push into low and then the high security reach to pull from low. And, a lot of the patterns people use, that one rule, we are just breaking it left and right in environments. And it's easy to flip that around. A lot of companies don't think about that. The other thing that I find a lot of companies, it surprises me, I guess, is, you get an attacker on an edge device. Let's say they get in on a web server, an FTP server, whatever it is you've got on the edge. A lot of people don't think about the fact that like once that attacker's on that system, what do they have access to? What keys do they have on that system? What's in the environment variables? What'll get that attacker into other systems? And then how is that system firewalled off from the rest of your network? And again and again and again and again, especially with startups, it's a flat network. So the second they get into an edge device, and it could have been like a low priority web server that was used for one customer or, like a vendor supply chain thing, or it was a marketing server that was temporary. The second they get in there, if they've immediately got access to the rest of your environment and they're on a system that has the same domain admin password or the same access to these other systems, you're toast. And so like a lot of the things we could do that prevent these problems haven't changed. We're just not doing that work. And as people move faster, they're frankly doing less work. I also find backups to be funny. I think backups have gotten worse than they were.
I think they have too, 100%, especially with the cloud. I saw this. So, because we have our own private cloud hosting business, and so we're in the mix on all of this, and we happen to use Rubrik as our backup solution. But I've used a number of different backup solutions down through the years, and backups ain't easy. So, but when you go to the public cloud now, people just assume you don't need to do backups anymore just because the cloud takes care of that, right? And you have snapshots and whatnot that can take place. But the management of those things, it's kind of like we've gone back 10, 15 years because it's not clean and it's not well integrated into anything. It's just not thought through. And forget disaster recovery. I mean, that doesn't even come into play, I think, when you're talking about cloud, because again, people just assume it's never going to go down. This thing will always be there. It's like, okay, before maybe the server it was running on in the closet, if the building caught fire, you don't have that problem now. The building's probably not going to catch fire. But yeah, what happens if that server gets compromised? What's your DR now?
And another thing is there's these wipers, and wipers is a whole different topic, but like there's these wipers for clouds, for the major ones, for like, there's Azure nuke, AWS nuke, and I think it's a nuke GCP. All of those are on GitHub. And they can wipe an environment very quickly. So if your backups are there, one of the first things it does is it's going to delete the backups. Then it deletes all other data services. It deletes everything and shuts down your account and logs you out. So there's literally nothing to log into of your business.
This is what we asked for. Somebody asked for it along the way. It's just like Terraform. It should all just be virtual. We should abstract everything. And yeah, some of it's just crazy. Yeah. So there was I can't remember the kind of business it was, but I think it was a business through AWS that I can't remember if they didn't pay their bill. There was some confusion in the billing.
I've seen that where they get wiped out and it's like, you're gone.
Yeah. Everything got deleted. It's just gone. And you just wake up one day and it's just gone. And yeah, people don't think about that. They just assume that this is all always going to be there.
Yeah. And attackers have changed their extortion techniques for cloud in an interesting way. What they're doing is actually really smart in a way from an attacker's perspective, but they get into a cloud environment and then they stand up another one in the same cloud, and then they sync all of your data over to the other one. And then they delete everything. And then they say, this is how much it'll cost you $5 million to get your data back. Now they can slow move that data out of that same cloud onto another cloud or somewhere else and then delete it. But then they still have a copy of your data that they can sell back to you. But that syncing, if you do it within the cloud, goes much faster than people would think. And so, it's a pretty horrific thing when that's that when that attack occurs and happens to you. And the defenses for it are very different than what we think of as traditional defenses. But again, if you have copies of your data, they're very recent. You've got a transaction log of stuff and it's off on another cloud or physically somewhere else. You can prevent that kind of thing so you don't have to pay out the attackers. So
Right. You may be down for a period of time, but you haven't lost your data. You could rebuild things. You could, it's not going to be fun, but you're not dead. You still have a copy. Yeah. This has been amazing. I think we could spend a lot more time talking about all of these things going on. Yeah.
I almost think we should touched on more of the cyber questions.
The AI questions, yes. All right. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Data and Confused with Trey Blalock. We've decided to split this episode into two because we just have so many juicy things to talk about with Trey. So please join me in the next episode where we go into more details. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to Data and Confused. I really appreciate you listening. Please go ahead and subscribe as I get this podcast off the ground. I have a lot of amazing guests planned, industry experts and thought leaders from the tech and cybersecurity world. So look forward to seeing you in future episodes. Thank you.